Welcome, everybody, to tonight's panel discussion, Diversity Instead of Uniformity, brought to you by BR50 within the Berlin Science Week 2021. My name is Julika Schmitz, and with a background in gender studies and as a policy advisor on non-discrimination and equality, I was very happy to be asked to moderate tonight's panel by BR50. BR50 stands for Berlin Research 50, a network that since 2020 pools the expertise and interests of more than 50 member institutions in Berlin, including those of 4 major science organizations such as Helmholtz Association, Leibniz Association, Fraunhofer Society, and Max Planck Society, as well as government departmental research and the field of private non-profit institution. And with BR50, not only the non-university research institutions, but also politics, universities, and public in Berlin have a point of contact, a multiplier, and a catalyst for current scientific and also social issues. And BR50 is managed by a joint office at Forschungsverbund Berlin e.V. and at the WZB, the Berlin Social Science Center. And BR50 is divided into 4 units that are represented on today's panel. And the 4 units are represented by 4 elected founding coordinators. Professor Thomas Sommer for Life Sciences, Professor Jutta Almendinger, PhD for Social Sciences and Humanities, Professor Ulrich Panne for Natural Sciences, and Professor Michael Hintermüller for Technology and Engineering Sciences. And at the end of this event, Ulrich Panne and Thomas Sommer, representing the 4 coordinators, will give a short wrap-up of the event. So, before we get started, let me just welcome those of you who join us tonight in the Naturkunde Museum Berlin, the Museum of Natural History. And to those of you watching online, you know already that this event is live streamed. So just on a technical note, be aware that when you raise a question later, your voice will be recorded. And you will have the possibility to ask your questions via the online tool Slido. So we will provide you with a link, or you can just go to sly.do and use the hashtag BR5021. And please feel free to use it already when you see our panelists and give us your questions so we can come back to them later on in the panel discussion. So I would like to ask you a question, and please raise your hand or just stand up if you agree with the following statement. Diversity management, gender equality, and internationalization have become guiding principles for almost all scientific institutions, especially in Berlin. So please show me your hand or stand up if you agree with this statement. Okay, that's kind of sad. I was thinking about this, and I thought like at least 1/3 of the hands would go up. Okay, but only 3 of you raised your hands. Okay, even more, let's investigate how diversity, gender equality, and internationalization advance scientific progress in Berlin. And for that, I would like to invite tonight's panelists on stage. Please, Franziska Emmerling, a solid-state chemist and heads the Material Chemistry Department at the Bundesanstalt für Materialforschung und Prüfung, BAM. Please join me on stage. Noah K.H. is an urban studies researcher and lecturer at Weißensee Kunsthochschule Berlin. Please join me on stage. And Iwona Kafiedzieska is a doctoral researcher at Helmholtz Center Berlin for Materials and Energy. Welcome. And Luc de Meester, he is the director of the Leibniz Institute of Freshwater Ecology and Inland Fisheries, the EGB. Welcome everybody with a nice and warm applause, please. I would like to invite you to introduce yourself and give us a little, opening statement. Would you like to begin?
Yes, sure. Yeah, my name is Franziska Emmerling. I'm from the Federal Institute for Materials Research and Testing here in Berlin. And I'm a chemist by training. And let's say from my point of view, diversity is key for advancing science. So if we want to solve difficult problems in science, we need all the perspectives we can get. They will not be solved by a bunch of similar looking guys, let's say.
Thank you so much. Okay, would you like to add?
But first I introduce myself briefly. My name is Noah Ha. I work at the moment at the German Institute for Integration and Migration Studies, being responsible for the national monitoring of discrimination and racism on one hand, and as well as a lecturer at the art school in Weißensee. My background is in landscape architecture, but I had been working very much on racism. So I have a very specific approach to diversity. So I think, it was very interesting to see that not so many people did raise their hand. To advance diversity, we have to question our norms and normative thinking, also how we do research. And I think it's important that we learn to change perspective if we are able to see other perspectives. And then from there on, we also can re-evaluate our questions. So I think diversity is very complex, and I think in the discussion we will dig deeper into that. Because it's not just a disciplinary, it's also an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Firstly, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So my name is Ivona. I come from Republic of Macedonia, and I came to Germany for my bachelor studies, which I did at an extremely diverse and international university. It's the Jacobs University in Bremen. Then I moved in Freiburg for my master studies, one in physics, one in renewable energy, engineering and management. And now I'm doing my PhD here in Berlin. In addition to my PhD, I'm also a Helmholtz Juniors spokesperson. So Helmholtz Juniors is the network that unites all doctoral researchers at the Helmholtz Association. And through the Helmholtz Juniors, I'm also an active board member at the N-Square network. N-Square stands, for those of you who maybe not have heard about it, at Networks of Networks. It's the joint network of doctoral researchers in Germany from all non-university institutions. That means Leibniz, Helmholtz, and Max Planck. So we represent the views of around 16,000 doctoral researchers. And as you know, within our network, there are lots of international and diverse doctoral researchers, and we are very happy about it. And we think it's a joint opinion of us all that diversity is the way to move forward and to make our research not only more successful, but also more sustainable. And I think when we talk about diversity, it's very important to understand that we do not talk only about individual characteristics. It's characteristics of a whole group, of a whole team can be diverse, which means that we have to move away from the idea of a brilliant scientist, like just one individual, and focus on the diversity of the teams in order to make brilliant scientific progress and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm Luc de Meester. I'm an aquatic ecologist and evolutionary biologist. I'm a Belgian, and I have been linked to the University of Leuven basically most of my career. I came in 2020 to Berlin to become a professor at the Freie Universität Berlin and to become the scientific director of the IGB, which is the Leibniz Institute for Freshwater Ecology and Inland Fisheries. I do not consider myself an expert in diversity issues, but I'm a little bit of an expert by experience on one dimension at least. That's being international, being heavily involved in science here, and then sort of being confronted with the little obstacles that we experience. And in addition, of course, as a director, I'm involved in developing guidelines and policies to promote diversity and inclusion. On the statement with respect to how diversity advances scientific progress, I would see both the global and a local dimension. Globally, I think it's an absolute important issue to exchange best practices, and you can do that by having diverse groups that come from different areas, work together, and then share expertises and bring them back to their own countries, or simply exchange. And locally, of course, we all profit from the same phenomenon, but also diversity is basically a highly enriching thing. So broadening the perspectives, both with respect to the kind of questions we ask, with respect to the approaches we take, and with respect to the solutions that we can come up with based on our science, I think. So that would be the statement.
Yeah, thank you so much for your introduction and the short statement. So I think it's pretty clear that tonight's panel discussion will not so much be a controversial discussion about whether diversity in science is desirable or if there are any hurdles that needs to be tackled. But I think we should rather, as you just said, focus on best practices, on exchange knowledge, on how to get diversity into action. And maybe before we do that, let us begin by explaining, or as you said, digging a little deeper into how diversity advances scientific progress. So maybe some of you would like to start by giving an example or shed light on that question.
Okay.
Yep.
I can start. Yeah. So I think for science, first of all, diversity means cultivating talent. When you attract diverse groups, you attract diverse talent. And that is very important nowadays, I think, because we are facing some of the biggest challenges that humanity has faced. I mean, name, for example, climate change, one of them. So you do not have one solution fits all. You need diverse thinking, you need complex mindsets, you need complex problem-solving skills. And that means you cannot find them only within one type of a person or one type of a group. It means you have to broaden up. And I think, you know, scientific research is a group of problem-solving, teamwork based on trust and collaboration. So when you try to increase diversity, you are increasing this as well, you know. And I think it's very important to actually define diversity. So I think many people are confused about what diversity means. When we talk about diversity, they think, okay, so it's like the opposite of the typical image that we have of a, I don't know, a CEO. So for example, middle-aged, wealthy, white man, and the opposite would be, you know, diverse. But I think it comes also down to skills, not only personal traits. So we have to think about diversity within every possible framework. You know, it has to be about ethnicity, age, gender, social background, also studies, you know, but also things like, for example, leadership skills, teamwork, and things like that. Things like that. And we have to keep in mind that the loss of diversity means loss of talent. There is no data whatsoever to support that you have a certain type of people being more skilled or more talented than others. Therefore, when you discourage or when you systematically oppress a certain group of people, you are losing a large pool of valuable candidates and valuable talent. It's interesting, for example, to see in Germany that, for example, at university level, or for example, the Abitur, it's almost 50-50 when it comes to men and women. But higher up the ladder you go, there are very few women. So where did all of them go, right? Even us in our PhD networks, we see a humongous amount of diverse people, but as soon as you move on up to the system, this kind of diversity gets lost, and then the whole system kind of gets very rigid. And that's very bad because it means you lost your talent. And also, I think we have to keep in mind that diverse teams and research address socially relevant issues. A diverse team will always come up with more socially relevant matters than someone who is very narrow-minded, right? Because you gathered people who have such a big overview and have such big ideas, things that you might have never even thought of, right? When I talk about, or when I talk with my colleagues from another continent or from another different social background, I learn so much from them, which means I, as a physicist and as a problem solver, I immediately get interested into new problems into the world. And I think this is something that will push us forward. We can learn from one another when we are diverse. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So we should not waste talent, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I saw you nodding to that, Mr. Luc de Meester, and we were just recently talking about teaming up and forming diverse teams. So what is diversity to you, and how is it important to your work?
Yeah, as I said, I think, and I fully agree, I think it's in order to think about questions, but also to think about designs of how you would design a study, it's the best thing to do would be to have a diverse team of people brainstorming about it. And that is more difficult than if you're alone or with two people. But it is also more enriching. So I can only tell from my own experience, I've done a lot of research in collaboration with Ethiopian researchers, doing work in Ethiopian settings, and that broadens the mind so much. I mean, the type of research I did was very different from what I do at home, but it broadened up my mind, and there were some issues, like for instance, algal blooms linked to climate change, that I now view in a totally different context than how I would have perceived them if I would just look at basically the Belgian or the German situation. So also with respect to solutions and stuff like that, it makes you think much more broadly. So I would perhaps add, I'm not a specialist at all, but so I would guess like in medical sciences, I mean, sex and ethnicity-linked diseases or responses to medication is actually a big issue. If you only have men looking at it, they may perhaps not even think of including enough women or including enough people from different ethnic backgrounds in the studies. So these things are really important. And it's only because you have diverse groups that these issues come up, actually.
Yeah. So diversity in the research design, but also regarding the people you have in mind you do the research for. Yeah, exactly. Would you like to add on that?
Yeah, I would like to add in that way that it's good to have a diverse range of people, but I think the next question is, are the people who we want to be diverse in the teams, are they there? And then I think we're getting to a structural questions. Also, if we talk about science and academia, and I think we particularly focus on Germany and Europe, then we have to ask ourselves, how is the accessibility to get into the university programs, not only gender, but also in regard to other dimensions, also questions of disability and able bodies and so on. And so then we also have to reflect the questions of inequality and how diversity and politics of diversity do respond to these questions.
Yeah, maybe adding on this, I think we all agree that diversity is important, but we also all know that diversity is not easy to achieve. So it's really, really difficult. And we can tell, so maybe all of us would say, oh, we have a diverse team, but there are people missing, for instance, from China or the US or whatever. And therefore, I think it's important to have also examples and role models to create an awareness how you can really get into this diverse scenario, starting from maybe really uniformity in the beginning.
Yeah, that's important. And I think maybe before we do that step and look for good examples, we should paint a picture for the audience, because I think many of you can relate. What are the problems? What are the problems international researchers or people coming from different backgrounds face when they want to work in science, academia, or do their research?
Well, maybe as the person who is now in a PhD phase and who has spent maybe her university and master studies in Germany and comes from a non-EU country, for me always the biggest hassle is the bureaucracy in Germany. I mean, getting a residence permit in Germany and then constantly renewing it, it's such a pain, honestly. And I think the people who are hiring do not have this enough in their minds. I think this somehow needs to be simplified. So I can share, for example, an interesting story. So I got recently extension of my PhD contract because of COVID and all of this. There were some delays, I think unsurprisingly. And then I had to go to the Ausländerbehörde to extend my residence permit. And then they see the contract and I tell them, but is it possible that maybe after this deadline you give me like at least 3 more months, because the thesis will go into a review process and then I have to defend, and this usually doesn't happen sooner than 3 months. And then the lady tells me, yeah, well, I can't trust on your word. I mean, this contract says till then, so you're going to get your residence permit till then. So now it means that in the most stressful months of my thesis, when I have to write and submit, I also have to somehow find a way to bring a proof to the Ausländerbehörde that I yet need to like defend, and that I'm still allowed to stay in the country so that they don't like kind of kick me out before my defense. And I think it's often overlooked how much stress this causes, especially for internationals. I mean, this has nothing to do, right, whether you're male or female. It's just simply about the fact of like where you were born, right? So someone decided that because you have non-EU passport, that you have to go through all of these hurdles, and there is not really much of support. I think many of the centers or of the institutes, of course, they tell you, here you need to go, this is what you need to do for your visa, and so on. But we talk about equal conditions, but it's not really equal when someone can fully dedicate to their work and someone else has to go through this, right? So then actually equality, it's not the thing that we should be talking about, it's equity, right? So because you might give to everyone equal conditions, but some might still be at disadvantage. And I think this is a big hurdle. And then, of course, you have the language, but at least I'm in the privileged situation that I work in an extremely international institute where almost everything is available in English, and my colleagues and all of those are open for that. But I think the system and the bureaucracy in Germany can be very, very painful with its bureaucracy, I must say.
Even for Germans.
Even for Germans,
even
exactly.
for Germans, even for those who are familiar with the language. And I think it shows something that many of like foreign researchers know the German word Ausländerbehörde.
Yeah.
That should not be the case, okay?
Well, and you see, my German is not that good, but I say Ausländerbehörde perfectly well.
Okay. And when we talked before this panel, you shared a story on bureaucracy or written words in English or German. So maybe you want to share your story of the first day as a director at IGB. And how?
Oh yeah. This was addressing me. Yeah, I mean, I would fully agree again with what you say. And so I come from a cultural background which is very similar to Germany. So in principle, my step was not at all big. But I do not speak German, and in the meantime, I understand it a bit. I mean, Germany is a large country and a huge language block, and so a very rich cultural background, philosophers, scientists, and so there is a big pride, and therefore everything is in German. And so it is actually much less bilingual than, for instance, in Belgium. If at the university, all our messages in Belgium are in 2 languages, because we do not assume that people know Flemish. And that's not the case in Germany, not always at least the case. At IGB, in the meantime, everything is bilingual. Even the newsletter every week is always bilingual. And it's a matter of international visitors, students, early career scientists, and even the director to feel welcome if in an institute that actually you can understand what is written and what is. So my story that I shared is basically that I arrived as the new director at the institute and I could not get in because I couldn't understand how the phone worked on the bell. because it was only in German. And the way it was formulated, I couldn't find it out. And so luckily there was somebody passing and let me in, and then then I could start my day. And it's sort of a little story, but it's sort of, I mean, I mentioned it, and immediately then now there is a bilingual thing. And I think it's very important that as a person coming from elsewhere or from a different ethnic background or whatever, you mention those things. Because it's not intentional, it's just overlooked because people don't realize it. I had two other. I mean, I also want to stress that German is a very difficult language to learn. I'm older than most of you here, and so my skills to learn new languages are limited. I'm not a language wizard at all, and I find it very difficult. And even if you understand it, then still reading letters is a drag. And secondly, even if you do understand it, and then people are making strategic decisions in their own native language, and you have to defend your point in your second language, you are at a huge disadvantage. So any discussion you would have, any brainstorm you would have, you would always be at a disadvantage because you would not say what you want to say because you can't find the words or you cannot formulate it as convincingly, etc., etc. So those are all small details, but they actually matter a lot in your feeling that you have if you're at an institute. I had written down two other things. I mean, obviously, I also indicated administration. So the German system is very heavy on administration. It was a little shock for me also coming from Belgium. And rather inflexible, I would say. And it's not only, I mean, in the science context, of course, it's the whole society. Yeah? It's everything. If you want, you need the German bank card, or you can almost not survive in Germany. And so that's very strange because, I mean, we have European bank cards, so why do we need German bank cards, etc., etc. It's a sort of a very long list. So in order to solve that, it would be very important that research institutes, that there is people actually welcoming international students and welcoming international visitors and helping them because they have done it before. And so that there is sort of self-help clubs or something like that. And the third part is a service orientation. It's something that I noticed that is a bit different in Germany compared to, for instance, in Belgium, but probably also in some other cultures. Sometimes Germans assume that you know. So they say, okay, you take the train and then that, and they do not give you the details, how to buy a ticket, how to check stuff, and they sort of assume that you know. And then people have to find it out themselves. It's possible to find it out yourself, that's not the issue. The point is you feel a little bit less welcome than if people actually explain you every single detail. So a sort of a service orientation to really say, well, this is how we do things in Germany, then you do this, then you do that, then you do that, then you do that. Mm-hmm. And having guidelines like that would actually help a lot for any international student, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So you pointed out, and you mentioned it before, the feeling of being welcome or not, and like the invitation of your research, your opinion, your voice matters. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add, it's not, I mean, that's the perception of the person who might be involved, but the other thing is, of course, that in discussions, those people will not speak up. Yeah. And therefore their voices is not heard, and so you almost have to rearrange a little bit to make sure that those voices are heard. Yeah. Okay. Let me. I'm trying to bend over to our researcher. How can we work on that? How can we make people feel welcome or invite them to voice their opinions? I'm looking at you.
You were looking at me.
Yes.
Yeah. I was a little bit thinking about. I think because we were talking about diversity and to make space more welcoming, and I think language is a huge part of it. But at the same time, while I was listening, I was like, but this is not enough. It's important, but this is not enough to really gain diversity. And when we had also a pre-conversation, we were also talking, I mean, as I said before, also about structures, because I mean, I'm a scholar, I want to make up a career, but if we look at who can make up a career, then we have to ask ourselves some hard questions. Who can follow up to make a career? And we were also talking about that gender is not only having more women on leading positions, but this as well is something about diversity. And so beside feeling more welcomed, but speaking personally for me, which is not welcoming to me, is the Wissenschaftszeitvertragsgesetz. We just had this campaign, Ich bin Hanna.
Absolutely.
And so this is not welcoming for me because there are huge hurdles to make up a career and being part of a growing diverse team and not just for a short time or for a specific phase in the career. Because if we think through diversity, we have to think through students, PhD, postdoc, and senior, and so on, through all career steps. And so going through that, we see that, in particular in Germany, when I look at the numbers of more women of leading positions and becoming professors, the progress is quite slow. And although I don't think we should discuss diversity only on the gender dimension, it's too complex, but just looking at this one, it shows how long it takes to really change the institutions. Because if we want to create knowledge, if we want to produce knowledge, and you said we shouldn't lose talents. But I think it's not only about losing talents, it's also about to advance our understanding. What is it what we see and what do we need to learn to get to ask the new questions and to make progress in there. And this goes beyond gender and backgrounds, but also in an international level. Not just in Europe, but also in a global perspective, like who has access to what kind of journals, like beside visa and residence permits. It's not for everybody in a global perspective easy to travel, to go to conferences. I mean, we might see changes in the upcoming years because after pandemic, I see that the whole system, how we travel to conferences might change, but until now, it is very much centered about the global north. And if you look into projects which go north-south, it's very much complicated. There is a structural hurdle because the money is coming and from the northern hemisphere and sending their scholars, but inviting scholars from the south to Europe or the US, it's really a problem. Beside either those countries, they can't bring their own funding budgets and also residencies and so on. So I was a bit like, language, yes, it's important.
But it's in the later phase, right? There is a lot that comes before, I think. Like,
I don't think it's either or. It should be always there. I mean, as it was said, it could be an easy change to just have a bilingual. So why isn't that always happening? This is, I think it's easy, but I wouldn't stop there and say, okay, this has to happen for sure, and then there are further steps to take.
So we've heard many obstacles already, like language bureaucracy, administration, service orientation, Wissenschaftszeitgesetz, and all the structural hurdles. And you mentioned the, like, let's say, commitment to learn, commitment to face the problems we are facing, right? And maybe we can switch a little bit to what does help. What do you know helps, or what do you see, what is already in place that may be focusing a little bit more on gender, like networks, what helps, like especially women to advance in science? Maybe Frau Emmerling.
Yes, I just wanted to say, because Luke mentioned this welcoming attitude and the start in a country. So let's say in our institute we have an international office now in place who would really help students to get these first steps done, also all these bureaucratic hurdles, and that is like a little thing to do, and it has a huge effect before actually other scientists would take the new PhD students around to visit all this Ausländerbehörde places and so on. So, but coming back to your questions, yeah, we have in Adlershof, we have a network in place. It's called LANA. It's a ladies' network in Adlershof, and we do mentoring on different levels, also different stages in the career. I have mentees, and I also had a mentor, so that is possible. And we have courses and trainings, but usually I think not the women need so much to be trained, but it would be better to train the other half of the population. So males need to know how they could handle the story and help women as a, let's say, as a bystander on their way to advance their careers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it takes everybody to
right.
achieve equality. What else does help? What do you know? What do you experience of like helping internationalization and diversity in academia?
Me again, yeah. No, I wanted, yeah, to agree on these issues that you mentioned, and also on the hurdles before actually coming, because this is something that I was indeed not highlighting, but this is from an international perspective and from a perspective on different national backgrounds, and I would even say it's not only this, it's also socioeconomic background within Germany. I mean, so there is already an issue that we basically don't have enough diverse students going to our university. So that is something that we as institutes can do little about, except complaining about it. So for instance, we at IGB, we really want also to attract, for instance, postdocs from Global South. This was one of the things that I wanted to create. But if you do that by just having our IGB fellowships open to everybody and then select, it's a very difficult decision to sort of say, well, you have somebody with an extremely good CV and then somebody with a somewhat less good CV coming from the Global South, and to compare them. And so we have now decided to try to enlarge our postdoc fellowships and to actually have a postdoc just only for people from the Global South, so that you can compare them amongst them, because indeed the access to libraries, the access to resources, the access to even education is different, and so what you then have to screen is the capacity, the potential, rather than the number of papers or something like that. And so I think these things you can do, they all cost money. I mean, we also have to realize that it's not that this is all for free, but these are sort of things that could cope more or less with what you are mentioning, at least to have people from Global South or from underprivileged areas globally, basically. So yeah, that's probably my contribution here.
Is there a network where you share experience on how to become more diverse or how to become more international in Berlin? Do you like learn from each other? Do you know?
Well, there is this emerging initiative now within BR50, of course, on the internationalization, and within the Forschungsverbund, of course, we have a little bit of experience that we can exchange, and we are developing guidelines for diversity, and we're discussing those at this moment. So, but I think BR50 could play a very big role in there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And who's contributing? Is there like, because I'm trying to like paint a picture, because you have like gender or equality heads within a unit. Do you have like a person who is committed to internationalization in the institutions, or do you do it as a director, or maybe?
No, we don't. I mean, we are not a huge institute, so it depends also on the size of the institute, how many of these officers you can have. But what we do have, and which is really great actually, we have a sort of a grassroots initiative, which is the Diversity and Inclusion Group, who are simply scientists and science support staff that's from diverse backgrounds that sit together and actually sort of discuss about any issues about diversity and internationalization, and also bring this to our attention.
Yeah.
So this is also one way to do it, is that you have a sort of a self-organizing group, basically, and I think that's actually wonderful that people do that.
Yes.
I would like to add also, because you were asking in terms of best practice. Well, I'm not such a huge fan of sharing only best practices, but as we were talking about internationalization, and I was also thinking what happened after 2015. And I think there was a major change in terms of internationalizations, because many refugee students came to campus, and so universities were opening welcome centers and also having all these programs, scholars at risk programs, and this is really like advanced career scholars and bring them to the German academic system. And there I see a lot of conversations how that could do, not in terms of internationalization, in terms of having new corporations, who can cooperate along which questions. And that, I think, is shaping a more welcoming culture at the universities. So, I mean, I watched it and I saw it at TU Dresden when I was working there, but also in Berlin, the several universities were setting up specific programs. And I think that programs doesn't have only an impact for the so-called targeted groups being refugees, but for all international students on campus, making legal knowledge accessible, and I mean, all the questions you have when you come in as a young student. So that I wanted to share here as well.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to kind of connect to some of the things that were already mentioned. And I think the first thing is, I mean, we are already in a very privileged position because we are already like higher up in the ladder. So now, of course, it's maybe easier to talk about like diversity and how we can increase it, but it starts much earlier, right? I mean, it's also, I think this is also a bit what Noah was mentioning, that you do not give equal opportunities to everyone from the very start, right? So I think we also have to understand that diversity is kind of like a cyclic process. It doesn't end when you hire someone and you say, okay, I filled in this, I checked this box, you know, I have this diverse person, but you have to understand that you like have to keep on going back and forth, understanding what is now needed next, what can you do to improve it. If you have this one person, how can you encourage this person to bring more people from like whatever background they are coming from, right? Because you have to promote diversity also as a form of inspiration, right? Because you don't want it to just end as soon as kind of it happens, because you want to end up actually changing things bottom up, right? I mean, any kind of biases start early on. They didn't all of a sudden appear when we were 30 or 40 or PhDs or directors. So it means that like we are systemically discriminating or discouraging either certain groups of people or individuals or countries, doesn't matter. I mean, just take open access as an example, right? I mean, if you want to have access to journals, it costs a lot of money. I mean, naturally, institutes or universities in poorer countries will not have this access as someone in Germany, right? So, of course, now it's questionable how much one country can mix or fund into another and things like that. But you have to understand that one of the best practices is to tackle problems early on. You cannot like start talking about them when we are already hiring PhDs or professors. Although I agree, for example, about with the short-term contracts. This is, for example, a big cause of loss of diversity. Just to share some statistics, in our surveys, for example, 70% of the PhDs say that they do not find academia attractive precisely because of these short-term contracts. 92% of the people that are under 45 and in academia have short-term contracts. By the time they get their full professorship, they had on average more than 6 short-term contracts, and it takes them more than 10 years to become full professor. Most of the people from diverse background, they're like, I'm out of this, you know, I don't want to deal with this, right? It's too much. Right? So you have to keep on changing the system, and you have to do it in a cyclic manner. Once you change something, you have to track back how it happened. You have to adjust. You have to be mobile, not rigid. Rigid systems will kill diversity. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Please use the opportunity and send me your questions via Slido. So it's sli.do and then use the hashtag BR5021. And if you have a question here in the audience, we will come to that in some minutes. And I would like to end this first round with asking you about the first steps. What are the most important steps that need to be done in order to tackle the hurdles and promote diversity? So maybe each of you, at least one step, maximum of 3. Who would like to start?
Maybe if we take up Ivana's example. So what she explained with her visit at the Ausländerbehörde is that there is a lack of awareness how an academic career actually proceeds and how the time scales are. You know, handing in the thesis, then there's time before you have the defense. So there is a lack of knowledge on that side, which puts a lot of pressure on her in this case. And I think it would be super easy for everyone to draw, let's say, a timeline, how this usually works, that could also be handed to some administration and to make it just clear. And I think as a director of an institute, or you could also sign that it's the natural way. So it's really an easy step, and it would make the life of many of our PhD students and also postdocs much easier.
Mm-hmm. First steps, most important step that needs to be done right now on a political level or institutional level or structural level.
I will just try. I mean, I find it very difficult to say the first steps or other steps, honestly. I mean, there is a whole lot that needs to be done. I would say 2 things. The second thing is not a step, by the way. But the first thing would be, I mean, try to raise awareness at all levels and sort of. I do think that you basically cannot have enough workshops and trainings and lectures on these issues to make people aware of it. And so, and that means both scientists and science support people. So what is, for instance, for international students, again, in terms of language, also important that there is language courses both ways. I mean, the international people learn German and local people learn English. And so, because any communication goes smoother, and therefore people will understand each other better, and all the prejudices will be reduced. As a hopeful signal, I would say, I mean, we have a long way to go, but as a hopeful signal, I would say that this is a problem that solves in the end itself. Once you have enough people from different backgrounds, then you will always have more and more indications on how to do it better, and then the prejudices will disappear, because it's really interesting that prejudices are especially important if people have never encountered people from other backgrounds. And so if you have a diverse group, then you see that actually things go very smoothly and prejudices are gone, and sort of things can be very harmonious, whereas in the beginning everybody's a bit afraid of it. That's the hopeful signal.
Yes, yes. I think we could, dig a little deeper, but let's stay with the steps that need to be taken. Anything to add?
I think I would also share that raising awareness is important, but not only on the individual level, what every individual level or person can do in terms of learning more and so on. But I was just thinking, I mean, we do have more diversity management or diversity offices in universities, but to have a structural analysis of what is accessible or inaccessible, and then from there on to rethink what could be changing within little programs and the larger organization, and to make it a task of the whole organization, which is not addressing just the individuals and offering workshops, but also to rethink the own structures and what could happen. And I think there are many, many, many ways to go, and it's hard to decide where to start. But to raise awareness in terms of also to raise awareness how these structures create uniform teams. in that regard. Yeah.
I can also add up some things. So I think firstly, from a PhD point of view, I think it's very important to discuss the contracts and what is really going on with Germany with these short-term contracts and the pressure that it's causing. I do think that this is something that can be changed and it should be discussed more and it should be on the long term be changed, because I don't think that academic career in other countries is so tedious as it is in Germany. That's the first thing. But the second, that I also think it's often overlooked, and it connects a little bit to the point that was mentioned that the problem will solve on its own. It's actually the so-called in-group favorism during the hiring processes. So I was reading recently an interesting story about a person who used to work at Harvard in the astrophysics department, and they were through the hiring process, and like admitting also students or employees, it didn't matter. And he said, but every time when we would review our applications, the best ones were always from men. And then one colleague, also academic woman, told him, maybe what you actually have is in-group favorism, namely that you are favoring the candidates who are similar to you. So even though you want to do something good, you actually end up being guided by unconscious biases. And I think this is important to point out, because not every discrimination or lack of diversity is done on purpose. Mm-hmm. Not every group or every person is sabotaged on purpose. It just means maybe that the people who are into the recruiting process are not diverse enough. So I think also the recruitment teams should be diversified. And I think this can slowly move us away from the unconscious biases. If you leave early on to have a hiring process or hiring team that it's not diverse, they will not hire diverse people, or at least they will hire at a lower degree. And this will kind of cause a ripple effect, and it will make it like being so postponed that actually we will even forget what diversity was, right? So you have to actually work actively. And since we were also talking about best practices, I would like to share something very close to home, so to say. It was something that happened at my center, so at Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin. We made something called diversity audit. So the center invited everyone to share, every employee, regardless in which rank or what kind of contract they have, what they want to see at the center or what diversity is for them. And then we kind of pinpointed to topics that kept on repeating, or that were important to the people in our center. And we kind of formed like task forces. And now the idea is that each task force addresses different points of what were brought in the audit. And we also even had things like, for example, conflict management or mental health. And someone might ask, how is this about diversity? But if you think about it, people who are somehow diverse into their teams, actually they experience also so much more maybe mental health struggles, right? Because they might not feel like they fit, or there are like other bureaucratic things that bother them. So it means that these are small steps that institutes or centers or companies can do. Mm-hmm. Just approach your people and ask them, without like in an open atmosphere, what they want to see, and then commit to it, right? It's all great that we talk that it's important, but at the end, if you do not commit to it, you don't really move forward, right? So I think it's very important to take a stand and to actually commit to put these changes into place.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I plan to open the stage now for questions, but I would rather prefer to direct this point directly at you, and by asking you, do you work in do you work in academia? Show me your hands if you work in academia somehow. Okay. Do you have teams or people dealing with internationalization of within your institutions? If it's a yes, okay. So do you take a stand? Do you, as you just said, do you say what you want and what is needed? Okay, so for those of you joining us via the live stream, I I saw like 2 hands when I asked whether you take a stand. This might be because of the background, because you don't need to take a stand, but as we learned, equality, equity, and diversity is not only a matter of those who feel excluded, but it goes both ways. Okay, so thank you for that. Please use your opportunity now and raise your hand if you want to ask a question. We have a microphone there, or if you want to make a comment or add on what we've heard, please feel free to do so right now. Just show me your hand.
So one question I have is, we've seen in Norway, for example, that we had a cabinet which was more women than men. So if we ask how the Scandinavian countries changed their gender equality, at least, it was the quota, right? So it was clear quota that for 10, 15 years in Sweden, in Norway, in Denmark, you had clear guidance that every board had to be at least 50, or starting with 30%, 40, 50% women. So what do you think about it? I mean, this is some big discussions. There are arguments for it, there are arguments against it. Do I only get the job because of the quota? And all these questions. What is the position of the panel?
Thank you.
Quota?
Yeah. The quota. Who feels?
I can say something
Yes, please.
about it. I mean, there's 2 ways to have quota, I guess. I mean, quota in appointments and quota in boards and evaluation panels. If it's only in evaluation panels and boards, you have to actually have a little bit of awareness that it may also have a negative effect on those women who are actually appointed. So we try to, on the one hand, we try to enforce it. On the other hand, we try to be very sensitive to that, because in the end, women are not doing anything else than being on boards and have to be present everywhere. And then they cannot invest so much time in their science, which is then, again, not very positive. So this is not easy. My gut feeling would be, so in terms of appointments, with respect to postdocs, we were now also thinking to, for instance, say, well, if we have 3 postdoc positions, 2 have to be women and stuff like that. I would sort of say, at the beginning, you should try to follow, I mean, to be very aware of it and to have very diverse selection panels, etc., etc. And if you see that it actually doesn't advance, then in the end, the only way will be quota. I think then, yeah, that's then the end conclusion. It is easier for gender, by the way, than for any other group. So that's another thing that you can think about.
Does the panel agree, or different takes on the quota?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I think we do think that we can make it by ourselves, because there are good arguments for diversity and it shouldn't be such a big deal to change it. But if we look at the numbers, and as you were referring, it took about 10 to 15 years. So at the very first moment it starts, it's hard. But on a longer term, and that is a political question, because then you really have to admit that you failed, and that because of that failure, you have to come in with politics of quota. And in terms of gender equality, I think it's a bit easier, because this is much easier to have the data and then to look, okay, either it's board or hiring process on the positions and so on. But when it comes to other backgrounds, and when we also look on people with a migration background or questions of racist discrimination, then it gets really hard to get those data, because in particular in Germany, it's very hard to get these kind of equality data. There are first data sets which are going, but it's not still there in the universities. So also from my own experience, also in smaller organization, when you set a quota, it's taking a stand because it forces you to look out for the people who you're missing in your board, organization, and so on. And so it's I think it's a good and sustainable way to change the organizations or whatever unit we are talking about.
Yeah. I want to read out a question coming from the chat to you. Do you have advice for people from minority communities who want to be a game changer? Hands on. How to become a game changer when coming from a minority?
Become many game changers. This is my first advice. I think it's important to come together, to form groups and collectives and support each other. And then it's much easier to take a stand wherever you go and are, and look out for other peers and people who may have the same experience, and from there on go try and to change the game, but not to invest the idea there are only individuals who can change the game.
I would also add that probably if the person is already asking this, then they're thinking about changing the game, which means maybe they have a bit at least of the change, of the chance to be the game changers. And I think it's just very important to believe in what you want to be changed and in what you perceive to be your personal mission, and to just be brave, you know. I mean, there will be many obstacles on the way, because these are unpleasant maybe things sometimes that we are discussing, or sensitive issues and so on. But I think it's very, very important to have these game changers, you know. And I think once this person starts speaking up and be brave, they will meet more support. And with time, this can grow into a community. So I think this believing in your personal mission and being brave is very important if you want to be a game changer, right? Yeah.
Perhaps I can add. I'm not sure, but I think it would work better if you do it in a multidimensional way, and so that you actually have diverse group, or that you team up with diverse group, and that it's not only about one dimension of diversity that you try to achieve. The other thing is, I would hope, but I actually also think that most people are actually of goodwill. And many of the things are actually because people have not thought about it or didn't see the obstacles or the barriers. So I think, at least in the beginning, the best way forward is to be very constructive and to come up with suggestions and say, well, this is what we observe, what can be done about it, etc., etc. I'm not sure if you keep on hitting a wall, whether you have to keep being constructive. That's something different. But I do think that sometimes people immediately think, oh, this is intentional racism, or this is intentional discrimination. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's a barrier that people don't see. And try first the constructive way, and try to team up with others who feel the same way and change things.
Yeah. Okay, regarding the goodwill and the unconsciousness, I have two questions. I'm going to read out the two questions, and you can just answer to the one you relate with. So Dora asks, as a director of a team, is there a good way to prepare people to be more inclusive, or to be ready to work with more diverse, especially in especially in science? That's the first question. And the second question is, how can we foster cognitive diversity within a field beyond diversity based on external factors like gender, age, nationality, to enable more innovative science?
Maybe to the first point, to raise awareness for diversity, I think we have covered it somehow already. These unconscious bias issues we all carry along with us. There are tests out there where you can test your blind spots, and it's super telling. So it was also telling for me. These are tests you can take online, and they bring this new perspective. So you think, I'm absolutely clear, diversity is the goal, and then you realize, oh, there's a slight undercurrency of racism in a certain direction. So this can be really an eye-opener, and I think that would also help these, what we see, these very uniform panels you see from time to time also in politics, and they are not aware that there is a, let's say, a person of color missing or a woman missing. They just like happy in their we look all alike situation, and this little test, they take about 10 minutes. They can help a lot, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You could also do self-tests. I mean, I remember that when I was member of a panel of ERC, that then they, for instance, you had to rank 35 proposals or something like that, and at the end they showed of every panel member the scores from men and women. And they did not say that we had to make them equal. They just said, well, think about it. Mm-hmm. If they are unequal, think about why they are unequal. Mm-hmm. Check how you made your decisions and stuff. And you can do that for everything. You can do that for every person you hire. You can basically screen that for yourself and say, well, okay, these are my statistics. What do I do with it? And as an advice to that team leader, I would say, confront them with diverse teams. Send them out to diverse teams, or have workshops, invite a diverse team and let them experience it.
Training, experience.
Basically training by experience, basically, mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I also would add that there are also, I mean, there are professional, there is a professional offer to do, I don't know, anti-racist kind of teaching, anti-bias training, diversity training, and so on. So depending on the team and how diverse it is or not, it's also possible to get professional people get in and say, okay, if you want to do a diversity-oriented organization development, you can look at these and these and that. And so it's not just sending out and that people do and make their experience. This, nevertheless, is important. But if you have a team and you want to work with a team, and if you want to raise awareness and also to look at your own routines, I mean, like weekly meetings, like who is speaking how and what, and so on. There's so many issues how you can change also a bit of the working culture to make it more inclusive and to unlearn some stuff and to relearn new stuff. And so I think it's also a good idea to bring people who are not part of the organization, but who could get advices, who could also do kind of supervision, and that could be also helpful in these kind of settings, but to see what is possible in these settings as change.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this falls into the area of training and leadership trainings. And when I, take a look at my colleagues or people I know working in science and academia, and I ask them about their trainings, well, they are good researchers, and then you just climb up the ladder. And sometimes people, they don't get trained in, let's say, skills, how to work with people, and not even talking about like biases. So let me ask you, who of you has a lead? Who of you is like a director or a team leader, or has people working for them? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Who of them did a training on, and I make it really broad, okay, on, let's say, biases, gender, or discrimination? Show me your hand. A training, on-job training. Okay, that's half of it, okay? 50%. Okay, thank you for that. So take your chance and ask a question to our panelists. Show me your hand if you have a question. Do you want to add on the questions I read out, or can I?
Just about the group leaders, from a person who is still into position to be led, so of course to have superiors, either supervisors, professors, directors of institutes and so on, I think it's always amazing also for us when we see that the person who are in higher rank than us are so willing to go through such either trainings or to increase the diversity in their teams. I think it creates a very healthy atmosphere, right? I mean, you feel safe to speak with these people, to speak up your mind, to share your ideas, ideas. And I think this is very, very important. I find it a bit sad that often workshops are addressed actually at the minority groups. So for example, you have, I don't know, women how to become leaders, or like PhDs going through good scientific practice, workshops and things like that. But actually the people in the higher positions do not have to go through as much trainings, right? And this also causes a certain disbalance of, how to say, of training, or even a bit of power, I would say, because the people who already reached the top, they are convinced that they are fine with everything. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes, you know, times are changing, and these people need to also be flexible and willing to learn whatever it is, right? Not only about diversity. So I'm always very happy when I hear that there is a certain group leader who asks, how can we do this or that? Because already this person, in physics we would say, crossed the energy barrier, you know, kind of like jumped over, and now out of here everything is so much easier once you've reached that awareness and willingness. And I think that's very important. And we would do really a lot better if every person in power asked this, and then we might not even need quotas about women, because this person will be well aware that you have just as equally qualified people among women, even without the quota, right? Yeah.
Do you have questions for your colleagues? Do you want to comment on something you've heard? Do you want to learn more about a statement that one of your colleagues made? Or do you have a question? This is the last round, this is the last chance, so please show me your hand. And even if it's a comment from your own experience working in academia, please let us know now. And maybe I just let you know that we all must leave this building by 8 o'clock. So we will have like around 30 minutes for the reception. And I promise you, this will not be enough for each and every one of you to ask your question individually. So take your chance now. And
I have...
Yes.
An addition, because you were saying that, and we were also having that in our pre-discussion about the diversity audits and auditing a university, and to make that specifically mandatory and binding to funding, that it could be a funding criteria that these institutions have at least these audits, because there are several out there. And I think it's a way, I mean, we could talk about loose processes, like every organization invents by itself, but auditing is kind of standardizing, but you also can review whether it makes progress or not. But if you connect that to the question of funding, I think that could be also very powerful in terms of making change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually want to comment on something else.
Please.
Because I think we are talking here about diversity, so I want to share a maybe a bit controversial opinion. It's about the quota on women. I, as a woman, am actually not a fan of them. So, you know, in Germany specifically, no one is discussing why women actually take like not full-time jobs, you know, or why they're leaving, and they think that quota would solve it, but it wouldn't. I mean, just look at like Kita places, you know. I mean, the mothers they're put to the choice, family or career. Even if you put the quota, you would still have plenty of women leaving jobs because the system did not allow them to stay into this job. I want to live in a world where, I mean, being a woman is not a big deal. We are 50% of the population, okay? So I don't want to discuss about women in the concept of diversity. It's just simply another person that you hire. I want to live in such a world, you know? And I think the problem with quotas is that women are already fighting with so much biases, and I fear that in societies such as Germany, quotas might open more space for discrimination and biases. Namely, you are here because we needed a woman, you know? And sadly, I have already experienced this a bit. It's not pleasant, okay? I mean, it has to be whether someone is qualified or not. And we should have something called soft quotas. Namely, for example, under the condition that 2 candidates are equally qualified, we hire the woman, for example. Okay, that's kind of like a soft quota. But you still force your employee to hire the women, you know? And we do have a lot of qualified women, but if you have a system that in a way systematically, step by step, kicks out the women, then it's no longer about the quotas. It's simply about the rest of your system that keeps on being built in such a way that sooner or later they will drop out. I mean, for example, in PhD phase or university phase, you have women, right? But the more time passes by, they get like so-called time poor, so they don't have that much time, so they have to choose family or career, household or career, you know, okay, my kid is sick, please come pick it up, you know, and things like that, you know. And I think it's not very talked about. You mentioned Scandinavia, but if you look at Scandinavia, also the share of household work, it's almost equal among men and women. While in Germany, this is not the case. Not yet, right? So I think you cannot really talk about quotas as like the solution of all when you do not look at the rest of the system. And I think this is very important for people to understand, because it's so easy to just put a quota and then still you will have the women dropping out, right? And then you will still have into CEOs and leading position men, which, I mean, I don't say that it's like bad to have men, right? But you can have just as equally qualified women if you allow them the system to thrive, right?
And if you allow them to have the same amount of time to spend on their jobs and careers. And when you take into account care work, not only children, but I mean, you're all familiar with that. I think for me, the most like, the clearest picture I got was on the data that in Germany, more like daughters, not daughters, how do you say that? I forgot the term. So the wife takes care of the parents of the husband. I don't know the term in German either. Okay?
In-laws.
In-laws. Thank you so much.
Parents.
So more female in-laws take care of their like related parents than boys, sons take care of their elderlies. Okay? So as long as we work like that, it's kind of difficult to achieve.
And there
equity,
are
right?
even more serious things, for example, the taxing system in Germany, right? You have this option, if one of the people earns more into a family, then that more of the taxation goes on the person who earns less, which means if you have a woman who did not take a full-time job, she is the one that brings less money. So she will be so heavily taxed that in the end, the family makes the math and says, but look, actually it's better if you do not work and be a housewife and take care of the kids and the family, then actually we're going to have more money. Exactly. Or what happened recently, the government says every person or family needs to have kita spot, but they do not have enough spots in the kindergarten, so they say we will give you money if the kid does not go to kindergarten. But then someone needs to stay with the kid at home, right? Yeah. And then who stays? The woman stays. So this is kind of like things that you should do before putting quota. You should fix the big holes into your system.
Exactly. And as I think many of you know, that the COVID-19 epidemic just like highlighted all these like structural mistakes. We have like the rates of women publishing papers, they've gone like down, and I think this really
but that is a point. But the rate of men publishing went up. That is even more scaring, actually. But as you mentioned Scandinavia or Norway and the quota, there is a different thing. It's a cultural issue. So in let's say in Sweden, for instance, the male let's say colleagues would also be asked, why are you still in the workplace? Why are you not at home spending time with the kids? It's a cultural thing, and it starts from top. If you think about the first COVID cabinet we had, the small one, there was no ministry for taking care of a family. So she was not included in this cabinet. So there was no, in Sweden, for instance, that was the first thing. How can we sort out childcare in this situation? And that is something, we have to work on. It's a cultural change.
You wanted to comment, right?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on saying, so the quota in Scandinavia went in parallel to changes in the society. And then with more quotas, there were more women also in the higher rank management posts, and said we need the Kita places. We need places for women also to get into this. It was a process. It was not from one day to the other. And I disagree that it is a problem on the postdoc level. I think our main problem in the moment we have is really on the full professor level. Because, at least what I see in biology and molecular biology, that we have on the postdoc level already more or less a 50-50 between men and women. But what we are missing is really the full professor levels where, and I think there, we don't need soft quota, we need hard quota. So now you have to hire a woman filling this position. I really, and then I think we have a parallel development also. All the other points which you mentioned are completely correct, but I think it would really help if we have the quota, but maybe I outed myself too strong now.
Thank you for that strong opinion, and maybe you can take it to the reception, because if we open the quota discussion, I think
always the most interesting.
We need 2 hours more for time. And since we are running out of time, I would like you, dear panelists, to close with just one thing you take home from this panel tonight. Luc de Meester, would you like to start?
Well, I would be hopeful. At the same time, I would also, if you then look indeed at these systemic issues, and I would actually like to add the fact, and I've honestly no clue how to solve that, is the sort of the rat race atmosphere, the negative competitive atmosphere that it's sort of essential for science that there is critical evaluations, but at the same time, this is then combined with the fact that there is very few positions, etc., then the systemic issues, combined perhaps with the absence of role models and therefore a sort of an imposter syndrome versus a sort of the lack of self-confidence, that people drop out and that they question basically, do I actually want to do this? And so that is a very sad thing. But to end up with something very positive, I promised myself that I would say so, is that obviously Berlin is a hugely diverse city. And so Berlin has actually, if the policies would be adapted in certain ways, if these barriers could be broken up, then it would be a huge diversity actually to become a real gemeinsam Wissenschaftsmetropole.
Yes, thank you. Ivona Kafedziska.
Yeah, so I think firstly it's a very positive thing that we are here. So it already shows initiative and interest, and I think that's a really great thing, and I hope it will expand. I always say I'm a physicist, so I love complex problems, and diversity is one of those problems. And I'm very passionate about it, and I only hope that people like us can keep on spreading the motivation about the diversity topic and the interest that we have, and that it will not be anymore a taboo topic, and that it will not be a scary word. We mentioned it a few times that actually it's not always on purpose why the teams are not diverse, and I already think this is a positive thing, right? As long as we accept that we are all prone to certain biases that we actually did not even have control of. Maybe this was something learned in our culture or in childhood. It's already a big step ahead, right? But now we are adults and we can have control of what we do forward on, and we can move towards building a more diverse and inclusive science, not only in Germany, but throughout the whole world. And I think it's important to understand that this is not only about promoting and doing good science, but it's also like the ethically and morally correct thing to do. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Noah.
I was a little bit hanging on that. There was this, I think, Luke, you said, the more diverse people come in, then the problem will solve. And I was a bit like, I don't think it's just about bringing more diverse people into it. I think it's actually the global challenges at hand will put a lot of pressure on us to think how we team up, with whom we team up, and how we create knowledge. Because we have to rethink what is this, what we can give at hand in face to these problems. And so I would conclude that diversity to me actually is a process of democratization. To make knowledge production, knowledge accessible, and it's a process of democratization and how we organize that. So it's not just about bringing and creating and crafting colorful pictures, but on a very systemic but also individual level to consider that as a question of democracy and a process of democratization.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'm the last one. So everything was said already, but I think we should appreciate the mix and try to bring the mix to work. And as scientists, I think you usually claim that we are lifelong learners, and I think diversity might be an issue where we still have a blind spot and a lot to learn, and I think it's an issue we need to tackle, but I'm optimistic about it. Yeah.
Before I invite the representatives of the BR50 to comment and let us know your key lessons learned, please give a warm applause for our panel today. So, may Mr. Ulrich Panne and Thomas Sommer join me, and I'm just going to catch you in front of the stage. Welcome. Welcome. You have one microphone for the two of you? Okay. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Panne. What is, you already have your phone in your hand, so you wrote down some key messages, I guess.
Well, the major key message is having two white male boomer summarizing the diversity discussion, I would say. Sorry on that one.
But lucky enough, he's already also white-haired and grey-haired.
But let's face it, that is the status of our society. Yeah? So that's an easy conclusion. On my point, we had a lot of small issues which I liked, starting from the bilingual one and having more courses for men than women to train for the work environment. I guess these are important things. But let's start at the beginning, diversity. I always think there is a very simple reason why you want to have diversity. It's Ashby's law of requisite complexity. It means if we have grand challenges and complex problems, and I guess we have a lot of them, you need the corresponding diversity. And that means also the corresponding diversity in the teams. So that's a very easy explanation why you need diversity. So little things. I have to state here, I'm for the quota. And the reason is very easy. We are too slow with our culture changes, and this is the only leverage we have. I would like to do it. By now, I cannot, because of legal reasons, I cannot enforce it, although I would like to do it. And that is already the major hurdle to get over. And I think everything else could be achieved afterwards, but as long as we don't have this, we have trouble. And the others, there is one final thing I would point out. From the outside, my son was in Colombia for a student exchange, and from the outside, Germany looks like heaven because we are a rich country and we put already a lot of money into international exchange. But on the other side, if you look at the report on the Pakt für Forschung und Innovation, there is having the best people, but there's nothing on international. There's no indicator on that one. And a final one, the WissenschaftszeitVG. The WissenschaftszeitVG.
Sorry, WissenschaftszeitVG. Yeah, okay.
They all know.
Everybody
knows it in Germany. That is that was the easy way out of Germany to get what did we do? We exchanged time in employment to get out of the discussion for hiring in science, because hiring in science means it's a exclusion process. It's a very difficult thing. People have to leave. Not everybody can have a permanent position. And these discussions are very hurtful discussions. And because the system didn't want it, we have the Wist Zeit VG, because you have limited resources, and limited resources means you will have a selection. Mm-hmm. And we have chosen a very lame way, you might say, to get out of this, and that is the Wist Zeit VG. We could do other, even with the strong German laws on employment. We could do it in another way, but we don't want to have the discussions that for young people, this kind of selection process. So this is all I had in mind.
In one sentence, what did you learn? What do you take home, and what do you transfer to the BR50?
This is actually self-similar recognition. I will take home, why the heck is not everything in my institute in bilingual? Because this is so stupid easy that you think, why do I have to sit here and get this idea? Yeah. But on the other side, you might say this coming from a man is a self-similar recognition.
Thank you so much. Mr. Sommer, what do you take home?
I found the most important, first of all, thank you to all of you who are discussing here. That was a great discussion and I learned a lot. But what you said in the end, diversity is a matter of democracy. I think this is the most important sentence for me, which I take from this discussion today. So that was really, I think, it breaks down everything to this really important point. And one thing that we started also with was the point that we are doing a lot at the institutes now. And I think science is also a little bit living in a bubble. So we are trying to do much more about internationalization, diversity than maybe in other areas. But still we forget that people that work at our institutes also have a life outside of the institute. And here they are running into problems, and we have to provide help for that. And this is one thing which I also take with me.
Thank you so much. And please, just because you're sitting in the back, please join me again. Franziska Emmerling, Noah Ha, Ivona Kafijiska, and Luc de Mestre. And we say goodbye to our panel. And with that, we invite you to the reception. Just join us to say goodbye, and just like one time. And yes, thank you so much. You go over there. Yes, that's it.